This episode is brought to you by Gazelle, the all-in-one business management software for piano technicians who want to spend less time juggling calendars and more time on themselves and the work they love. Be sure to check out some of Gazelle's newest resources with more than 8 hours of video lessons on learning aural tuning and tuning ergonomics, skills we as technicians use every day. Whether you are growing your skills or your business, Gazelle will help you save time and wow customers. Visit growwithgazelle.com/ProPTN to learn more. I'm McKinley Coda, and you're listening to the ProPTN Podcast, an interview talk show for piano technicians to tune in to what the pros are talking about from across the industry. If you enjoyed today's episode, show us some love by following us on your podcasting platform and leaving us a review. To learn more about us here at the Professional Piano Technicians Network, visit us at proptn.org. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, McKinley, and today we are joined by none other than the East Coast titan of rebuilding himself, Jude Reveley of Absolute Piano Restoration. Jude, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, McKinley.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Now, to start us off and get the ball rolling, can you give us a brief overview of your career in piano technology and all the different places it has taken you over the years?
Sure can. Well, I guess I'm one of the old timers now, so I'll try to keep it short. But, it has been a journey of over 3 decades. And I started out just as a lover of music. We had an old Brahmbach in the house, and my mom was a folk musician, sort of hanging out with Bob Dylan on Bleecker Street.
Oh, my gosh.
I grew up in New York City, so it was a very fun, neat place to grow up and very music-oriented, played basically in punk bands is what got my start as a guitarist.
Oh my gosh.
But I always loved music. Kind of grew up with rock and roll, but got into North Indian classical music, listening to Ravi Shankar and John Coltrane and classical music. So by the time I was 18, I decided to try to get into Berklee College of Music up in Boston. Went up there, and they had these 5-horn bands that you could just bring charts into. So I think that would be like all the saxes, tenor, baritone, and alto, trombone, trumpet, and then like a rhythm section. And you can write for these bands, and it was just an amazing experience to work on my composition chops. And then that grew into writing for a big band, and then eventually I did a dual major in classical composition where bigger is better, so I'd write for a couple tone poems or for full orchestra. And every semester as a composition major, I could rent a different instrument just to get them under your fingers to know, like, okay, on an oboe, you don't want to do a trill with B and B flat or,
Wow.
Just feeling the texture. So it's kind of like master of no instruments.
Jack of all trades, yeah.
Yeah, jack of many. But the piano became really important because I was writing for such large orchestras. I just kind of ran out of strings on the guitar, and it was not a very effective tool for composing. So I was in the piano rooms more often. But as a non-principal, we were second-class citizens and often got kicked out. So one month I spent my rent money on an old Draper Brothers upright piano that got craned into my 3rd floor. I lived close to the Symphony on Weston Avenue, for those of you that know Boston.
Wow.
And the first night, a jack came unglued. I had no idea how to even, pull an action, but I got at it with a pair of chopsticks and Elmer's white glue and got it fixed, and I was hooked. I did have a background in construction. My mom was a musician. My dad was kind of renovating, small buildings. And so I grew up on job sites, swinging a hammer, like by the time I was in 2nd grade. Mm-hmm. So, I had a certain comfort level with power tools and just figuring things out. I would often blow off my homework to fix my answering machine with a paperclip spring. I mean, that kind of stuff, just I think very ADHD kind of minded approach.
Same.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So at Berklee, I had an opportunity to work for the company that I bought this upright piano for. I basically just hounded them for months and said, I'll wash windows, I'll sweep floors. And they brought me in, and the apprentice position was basically the one that got sent over at 5 a.m. to just inspect all the practice rooms and report back to a senior technician. And then they'd take you over, and it might be a broken key stick or a broken string, and you'd kind of watch them fix it. But they were pretty desperate to get people out there. So before long, I was doing these repairs myself, and they really emphasized tuning. They were big into knowing all your coincident partials. And so I spent 2 years really in the trenches with that, but knew that I wanted to get deeper into it. So I switched over to another company that was replacing Soundboards. It's George Crawford and Aardvark Piano. They're still in business today, and they were one of the few people in Boston that were replacing Soundboards at the time. I mean, there were more then than there are now.
Yeah.
But I worked with him and David Stanwood, so I started working with him very early by like 2000, and we had the NEEXCO convention, and we had a rebuilders gallery, and Rick Forens from ASU was the institute director that year and called up local people that had just put on conventions to get ideas. So I spoke with him and said, we had a very successful rebuilders gallery. And he's like, oh, yeah, we were thinking of doing that. So I put in a pitch. I'm like, if you are, I'll bring a piano. And I was a nobody.
Oh, my gosh.
The people that were there were like really, really top rebuilders. And I guess Rick did his due diligence. He called up Melanie Brooks and said, do you know this guy, Jude? And she's like, yeah, give him a shot. They gave me a shot, and then I ended up, at the time I was working on my own 85-note Steinway B, but then I got a better job. I got this Centennial, incredible Rosewood Style 4 Steinway. It was an extremely difficult job, and that's kind of how I met Bill Schul, who's one of the Steinway knowledge gods in the industry, and that's what's on my website as sort of our flagship piano.
Okay, hang on. So this is so action-packed. I have so many questions. What were some of the things that made that Steinway Centennial so much more difficult than the B?
So it was a jointed rim. So instead of having the continuous rim, it predated that technology. It was a full pin block, so that was good. But back then, the action shifted to the left, and the sostenuto was made out of a piece of string with little nails in the underlevers. It had soundboard compression hardware built into it. So in the bass corner, there are these bolts that could put pressure onto the soundboard to increase the crown, like adjustable crown.
What?
Yeah, it had some really outside stuff. They didn't have the whole tone collector framing invented yet, so it was kind of built more like a boat with crossover beams.
Right.
I mean, this was a concert grand made of rosewood veneer and the serpentine legs. I mean, an absolute beautiful job. Steve Kilroy did the refinishing, and it just came out gorgeous.
Yeah.
But the action ratio was like 7-1. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And, I'm putting on like modern Steinway hammers. So that was a problem.
Yeah.
I ended up correcting that and doing the best I could with what I knew at the time. The piano eventually went to Piano Craft, and they did a little bit of work on it and touched up the cases like a decade later. And then it got donated to the Colburn Institute out in LA.
Wow. Yeah.
Where it's beloved.
Looking back on that piano job, are you still happy with the work that you did? Or do you feel like you could have done it better?
All in all, I'm happy. There were many all-nighters for all of us. Oh, of course, I forgot to mention Ron Nossaman, who became a big mentor of mine. He's no longer with us. He was really into completely modifying and redesigning, just sacrilege. He was beautiful about it.
Yeah.
But that really opened up my eyes to a lot of things and got me into this whole concept of design-driven restoration. Because, back then we've learned this piano has rib number 3 is 1 inch wide by 7/8 tall. I'm metric now, but back then it was all imperial unit.
Yeah.
You would just copy exactly what was there, and you'd go through all this work. I was working on a Bechstein L, and I put everything back the way I found it, and it sounded horrible. It was a badly scaled piano, and I'm like, I can't put all this blood, sweat, and tears into this work and not have it be better than what I was finding.
Yeah, so you're an advocate for improving upon rather than redoing.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken it way out, and then I've kind of brought it back in, because I do think if you're working on a Steinway, there's certain things that are integral to the design, and you want it to still look and kind of sound like a Steinway. So, for example, Ron Nossaman, the piano he brought, he did a transitional bridge on a Steinway B, just for the sake of solving, because down there you can hear the tension gets a little bit low around F2, and he totally smoothed it out. I mean, he came up with a really brilliant solution, but I think most people would be like, wait a minute, where's that little thing that I'm
used to hearing,
the Steinway B should have? Yeah.
Transitioning from tuning to soundboard work is a huge jump for a lot of people. What was that transition like, and how did you acclimate to that?
That's a good question. So in the 2 years where I was just going into practice rooms and tuning, I found ways to get mechanical. So Berkeley mostly had, or the instruments that I was working on were almost exclusively P22s and P202s, and the trap work would get stripped out. They were very hard to access, and no one wanted to deal with it. But I volunteered and just found ways of doing things other than tuning. But it really wasn't until, I had an opportunity to work in a shop where they were replacing soundboards, and it's just a different switch that you flick. And I do it to this day. And I had people that discourage me. They're like, you got to specialize. You got to be either a tuner or a rebuilder. And I'm like, well, I'm working on pianos. It seems to be a specialty enough.
It is an endless vat of learning. So you're like, I am learning. So then,
There's no there with this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. Every morning to like wake up and take my work home with me and work on my little spreadsheets and
Amen.
figure out better tools to use and employ and basically find all kinds of ways to not make money, to squander that otherwise what would be profit.
Do you have any spreadsheets that you're working on now that you're particularly excited about? We love a spreadsheet.
I've released a few online. So I've got my equation of balance calculator, which takes David Stanwood's equation of balance and solves for each term simultaneously. So if you mess with, say, the strike weight, it'll be out of balance, but it will show you all the potential solutions, like whether it's to the front weight or to the ratio. So it's something that you can just kind of play around with. Now you can model it to show proof of concept of the equation of balance, and it's just a great sort of learning tool. It's part of our greater touch weight, because basically our spreadsheets, they're more like programs now. It's like the poor person's database. Certain calculators will be part of a much bigger program. So I have one for basically designing the whole action that works a little bit with Bruce's action program. He also has a scaling program. And of course, Tremaine Parsons has his program. But then in my scaling program, which kind of evolved from a spreadsheet that Ron Overs gave me, and then some ideas that Ron Nossman had too, where you have the whole scale of the piano, and you're looking at tension and harmonicity, but then there's also, you're assigning where the loads are at each rib, and then having the bridge smooth that out so that you can build your soundboard design off of what the stringing scale is. So that's a spreadsheet that has 20 worksheets within it, and they self-populate other ones.
Yeah.
It sounds very scientific, but it's more of an advanced recipe.
Yeah.
My wife will always get on my case because when we're in the kitchen, she's somebody that can just like grab a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like, oh, we don't have this spice. We can substitute with that. And I'm like, no.
That does give me a great segue, because I have a colleague who wanted to know what your favorite soundboard designs are.
The one that works. This is an area that's still very, very elusive. We're much more on top of like touch weight and inertia and actions. I mean, we're really getting that dialed in so that we can just make it beautiful. With soundboards, it's fraught with all kinds of complications and things that are beyond our control. If it's not as successful as we were expecting, is it related to the rim? Is it related to the plate? Certainly we can see if you've got something that's not functioning well in the soundboard, there's no voicing or type of hammer that's going to correct that. It's a transducer that's got to respond from 24 to 3,000 hertz. What we're asking of a soundboard is just really unrealistic, and yet we can pull it off. So it's about balancing the spring rate and the mass and the stiffness. So what I'm looking for, and I had this invention that I did 15, 20 years ago. One of the things that really bothered me was how to properly set down bearing, because everybody would talk about the bearing distance and use drill bits or whatever, but everything was kind of unloaded, and it's a chicken and the egg type concept.
Yeah. And
there are ways where you wedge down the bridges to get 50% deflection or whatever it is, but it's really quite meaningless because the strings are going to do to that soundboard whatever they're going to do. And part of it's not even being able to use the flexure formula. And I know I'm getting kind of out there with some of the engineering terms, but
no, this is good.
We have what's called the modulus of elasticity for the different species of wood we might be using, whether it's sugar pine or Sitka spruce, obviously has the highest stiffness to weight ratio. The eastern white spruce or Engelmann or other alternatives that are a bit more lightweight. And if you're putting something in a spreadsheet, you might be referring to the modulus of elasticity, which is Young's modulus stress over strain. That's just a laboratory that has tested a bunch of pieces of wood, but we're dealing with organic materials. So just because it says it's got this certain quality to it doesn't mean that the actual stick you're using is going to be yielding that.
So my experience with Breedlove guitars, they're made in Oregon, but they have a lot of acoustic sound technology. They can now use computers to figure out which areas of a piece of wood are the most resonant or are the most pliable or the most acoustically, sonically pleasing or have the most potential. Do you see a lot of that technology making its way into soundboard design in a way that is improving how we're doing it, or are we still a ways behind on that?
I would say that we're a ways behind. The piano is a more complicated instrument to study. For example, we've often talked about like, well, if only we could use laser interferometry to kind of measure what's happening with the soundboard underneath and do a perfect modeling of that. The problem is you've got all the beams in the way.
Right.
It's very easy to take a guitar and restring it.
Yeah.
But with a piano, it's like
Yeah.
it's hard to get that A-B empirical experiment.
Yeah.
There are things that are happening. The technology is evolving, and I would like to see it being more employed. You know, Fazioli's done some stuff. The manufacturers probably have more potential than a small rebuilding shop. Now, that being said, so when I invented this system of using springs as a known spring rate for loading up my boards with the strings off, recently I converted that to pneumatics. I used to have all these funny devices I call the crownulators for measuring that, but now I can put a dial indicator anywhere on the soundboard, and with the flick of a switch, it's like strings on, strings off, strings on, strings off.
Wow.
Because we know that this string scale of 35,000 pounds is going to yield 600 pounds with a certain down-bearing schedule. That we know. We can say like, all right, if I stick to this bridge height loaded, that's going to give me 600 pounds. And then you can like apply that load and see where it's deflecting. And one thing that I learned is that my soundboards were way stiffer than what the flexure form would otherwise indicate, which I knew because the flexure formula is just looking at a simple beam, whereas with a soundboard, you've got a box beam. It's glued around the edges, and you've got the thickness of the soundboard. The ribs are tapered. You've got non-centered loads. You might be diaphragmizing the board. I do partial diaphragmization. It's just a really complicated thing.
Yeah.
So I really try to like tell my clients, look, when you hire me, you get my passion and my experience, but ultimately what we're great at is taking an old mousetrap that's been in the barn for 30 years and making it work again. But I can't necessarily deliver what you think of as your holy grail of tone because, for one, there's no way of communicating that. We're going to make it the best that we can try to make it. But every piano, whether you're working on the same model, Steinway O, for example, might be a little bit different. Certainly, like the Bs of the late 1800s are different than ones from the 1960s. When I first had an opportunity to, say, work on a Bechstein B, I was applying continuous rim designs to this quaint spruce rim, and it wasn't successful. So that question about what is my favorite soundboard design, it has to be the one that's going to deliver. And when it does, you're like, oh, thank God, I get to live to see another job without being completely busted for imposter syndrome.
We can never escape the imposter syndrome. No. Now, do you have a favorite soundboard design from a manufacturer that has really made you say, wow, they know what they're doing here?
That's a tricky one because I'm not sure that even within the manufacturers that I've seen a tremendous amount of consistency. The high-end instruments, it's hard to mess them up.
Yeah.
And if they can just keep things reasonably balanced, I mean, whether you're talking about an Academy Series Yamaha or a Steinway D or a Fazioli or a Steingraber, all of them have really, really lovely pianos at that level. Where you really see what someone's capable is probably on the smaller mid-size baby grands.
That's really insightful, yeah.
And that's where I love to experiment. Like we just finished this Teague. Walter Teague was an industrial designer, and he had a really neat design for a Steinway M, and we had one come in with a silver plate and silver felt.
Wait, silver felt?
Yeah, like a frosty blue, yeah.
Oh, that sounds gorgeous. I've never seen that.
So that was a challenge. Jacob Irwin helped me with that. You know, I'm like, can you get this gray felt at all? And he's like, I don't know. We can get white felt and dye it. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. So he kind of set me up with that. I did some experimentation, and that worked out quite well.
Wow.
But one of the things that I did on that one was I do kind of believe in the Del Fandrick, ditch the cantilevered bass bridge, especially on those smaller pianos. And I like what Steingraber does with drilling holes and cutting out the slots to give the bass bridge flexibility. So we did that to a Steinway M, and just phenomenal improvement on the bass.
Wow.
The lowest two semitones, we're still faking it. There's only so much you can do, but we brought alive probably 5. Normally on an M, like the F1 down is just an effect.
You know, I noticed that the Absolute Piano website boasts that one of its specialties has been to tackle the jobs that other piano technicians or dealers are either unwilling or unable to carry out. Can you give us some examples of what those jobs have been? Which ones have been the most difficult? And contrastly, which ones are you the most proud of?
I think it was one of my dear friends in Connecticut, Eric, who said the 70s wants their website back. And Hannah's maybe going to help me out with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I really need to take that quote down because I'm really just asking for punishment there. When I first hung up my own shingle and I was sharing space with my mentor, George Crawford, it was a little bit tense because I was still using his belly deck and I was getting my own jobs. So I had to try to find stuff that was different from what he was doing. And that kind of propelled me in a direction. And oftentimes I would get the jobs that he didn't want to do. Like he had Harvard as one of his gigs, but there was like a Blutner with the patented action that he's like, yeah, go ahead. Have fun with this one. And those are ones where the soundboards are like mortised into the case.
Yeah.
Of course, the Style 4, any historical Steinway, any historical piano. I've done them because I'm curious and because I feel like they inform my knowledge. I'm mostly interested in the best performance instrument, more in the modern piano category, but I'm taking Alan Winkler's harpsichord class in a couple of months.
Oh, yeah, that's exciting.
But we've had a lot. I mean, being in Boston, we get a lot of chickerings. You know, we have that funny saying, if you've seen one chickering, you've seen one chickering. Nowadays, I try to like limit myself to one or two of these a year. We do have a Blutner patented action that we're working on right now. We've got a Steingraber concert grand, a reasonably new one that just needs a whole new belly. It's for a high-end recording studio in New York City. You know, it's a nerve-wracking job, but we're going to be using the Palello bridge A-graphs on this one by the client's request. So been working a lot with Stephen Palello. We do use his wire and all the hybrid scaling.
That actually plays into my next question, which is, can you give us your current favorite rebuild recipe?
There's a subjective answer to that, in that I want the three registers, bass, mid-range, and treble, to have certain characteristics. I'm looking for a strong fundamental with a reedy tone in the bass. The mid-range should be very warm with a lot of bloom, and then that transitions to a very bell-like treble that can float with a melody range. I like the piano to have distinct registers to it. Sometimes people want it completely smooth. It's a kind of sonorous, impressionistic painting of the orchestra. So you've got the ability to get into these registers. It's like, I want to hear the bassoons and I want to hear these different qualities of tone. So going back to your question about soundboard design, it's hard to look at, for example, an old Chickering that doesn't play anymore and is not what it was when it was new. But if you have the fortune to have a client that really wants to go for it and put a new keyboard in it and a new soundboard and really make this a new piano, the DNA of that piano is in the plate. And that's going to kind of inform a lot of the decisions of where the bridges are, what to do with the soundboard. And when you can do that successfully, you're often quite surprised at what that instrument is. For example, there's a Chickering 116 that we did that to this day is one of my favorite pianos. It's so unlike a Steinway. I mean, you walk into a store today and whether it's Estonia or Yamaha, it's like they seem to be competing for this kind of homogeneity of tone. Whereas back then, they really believed in having, maybe it was by accident, but they wanted to distinguish themselves. And I don't believe that there's one piano that can satisfy the entire repertoire. And for that matter, nowadays, to satisfy classical and jazz and pop and all the styles that they're being used in.
When you mentioned earlier that you went to Berkeley and you developed interest in all these various musical genres, such as Indian classical music or ragas, I can't help but wonder if genre influences your work on a piano. Like, do you find yourself making different decisions about shaping a piano sound if you happen to know it's destined for a genre that's not as commonly found in the West?
Interesting. No one's ever quite asked that question. I don't think that I would try to make a piano sound like a sitar.
Yeah.
But there's a tone within sitar or bansuri flute. There's beauty. And I think with the piano, it's really trying to find the beauty within the piano. I mean, I'm trying to make the best piano, not a piano that sounds like something other than what it is.
Right, right. Yeah.
You get into the whole microtonal.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard hybrid composition where they combine piano with different ways and different styles. I'm not sure if Johnny Greenwood, one of my favorite, Radiohead.
Yeah, he's my favorite too. And he's got his side band, Janoon, the Indian band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I could see him incorporating keyboard or some, Western in that kind of vibe for sure.
Yeah. It's like when you're talking to a client about regulation or voicing, and, if they're a blues pianist, they're probably going to be slamming the keys a lot harder than a classical pianist is likely to on a daily basis. So when you get into rebuilding, it seems like it could open up a whole different area where you can be asking the same questions, but about more fundamental aspects of the piano. Yeah.
When I'm I'm working on the piano, for example, on this Steingraber, the client has sent me recordings, and it's great to have those on in the background and feeling that they're influencing how you're working on the piano.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
would say that I'm really trying to keep it simple in terms of having the piano produce the energy.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you could do all kinds of things, such as prepared piano.
Yeah.
There's stuff that you could get into that will kind of be beyond the scope of what I need to be dealing with
Mm-hmm.
when I'm just trying to like A0. Can you recognize it as such? And do you have actual melodic notes up in the top octave? And is your killer octave, is it out there projecting and singing? I'm kind of going more for those questions of energy and is it an effective transducer? And then, of course, the action, the way
Yeah.
the action plays.
Yeah,
It should
absolutely.
not be an impediment. It should, as quickly as possible, bring the performer into a state where they don't even know that the piano's there. It's just them and what's coming out of their soul. That's the
Yes.
ideal anyway.
Yes, 100%. With such experience in historic piano rebuilds, are there any historic piano designs, systems, or concepts that you particularly like or draw inspiration from?
I mean, there's a lot of neat things. For example, you probably see more of an attempt with various impedance devices in some of the older instruments, putting in sexy cutoff bars at the bass trap in the corner, which you'll see on concert grands, but those can often be employed on smaller instruments. Now, there's a lot of great ideas. Ed McMorrow, he likes using that acetyl copolymer as a counterbearing, and he even has the tunable front duplex patent. I mean, when I was mentoring with Ron Nossaman, we were doing all kinds of things, what you call the fish up in the treble, laminated ribs. I was just ready to try it all. We were putting in steel bars in the belly to mass load the belly rail,
Yeah.
instead of that thin
Yeah.
strip of wood that they have up there. But it's a lot of extra work, and I can't say that it was necessarily an aha moment. Maybe something happened there. I mean, I do have variable radii for crowning my ribs, and that's based upon the loading and our general recipe. It'd be a lot easier to just throw in a flat rib. We use a little bit of compression crowning, but we're not going as dry as, say, Steinway. And we're scientifically verifying it. We have a lab oven so we can take samples, and then we can weigh our soundboards to determine what the moisture content is. Because
Wow.
the meters that they sell, Dean Rayburn just turned me on to a new one, which was definitely improved. But most of them, because the specific gravity of Sitka spruce is what it is, these meters don't read typically below 7%, maybe 6.5. And we're working in a range of like maybe down to 5. With Steinway, I think I've heard they go as dry as 3.5. So
Do you tend to assign technicians based on specialty or where they might excel, or do you try to keep them all multidisciplinary? How do you figure that out in terms of who's doing what and why?
So that's part of the get to know you beginning of hiring someone. I mean, you really can't tell from an interview. Some people have a mechanical eye. You give them a pencil and they can draw a near perfect circle, or they can see square. I mean, that's something that I've recognized. It's something that I have. And if you don't have that, it's very hard to be a great tuner with the precision that you need in the shop and using a chop saw and all the machinery, seeing how they can handle a router. I mean, all of these things to a certain extent can be taught, but to another extent, there is a natural ability that I think to be doing really high level precision work, it's like they either have it or they don't. And I have to determine that pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that they can be doing, but they might not last that long in this environment. And I might suggest you might want to stick to the tuning, or if this is something you really want to pursue, yeah.
So, what are some of the most common mistakes you see newbies make when they're entering the field?
Not just newbies, but all of us, self-awareness for sure, like knowing what you're good at and where you need improvement, confidence, whether it's over or under, having the right balance. A lot of times people come in, they can be very defensive, taking criticism. It's hard. We brought Louis Delbeni in, and I was completely open to having him say what he thinks. And it's challenging because you get kind of stuck in your way. And like one example was he really believes that you should have your tools and your own setup, whereas the shop has been set up more of like stations for different jobs. And that actually works very well for a one-person shop, or even maybe as you grow into 2 or 3 people. But I've learned even for myself to agree with him by having a little portable station rather than always going to wall 1 or wall 2 for that screwdriver.
Right.
And that's been how I've excelled with amalgamating so much information from all the greats that are out there. Like if you can just subdue your ego, usually they want to do the talking anyway. So it's like, all right, I'll just sit here and listen and sponge up everything I can possibly learn. And at a certain point, you think like, okay, I'm going to be the one doing the talking. But no, I still like to try to listen. Problem is most people just want to ask me questions now. And but I still want to listen.
Right. Hi there, this is McKinley from the editing room, here to remind you that if you have not already signed up for a ProPTN subscription, you're seriously missing out. Whether you need articles from our Beginner's Corner to help supplement your students' education, or if you're a seasoned tech who wants a refresher on certain specialty skills, ProPTN has got you covered with peer-reviewed editorial content, video demonstrations, and photographed step-by-step instructionals. On top of that, the collection is our online marketplace that is a must for maintaining your tool collection. If you want to try a tuning lever before you buy it, you can check out our rent-a-lever program. If you make and design your own tools, you can sign up to distribute them through the collection. If you're a retiring technician, we can sell your tool collection on consignment. Or you can just go shopping for a whole selection of new and used tools from brands and technicians you trust. So what are you waiting for? Go sign up now and you'll thank me later. Anyways, back to the show. For beginning techs who might not have the experience or knowledge to recognize the legitimacy or genuine ability of the talking that their mentors might be doing, what are some of your top red flags for bad tech work?
Well, you're going to have to suss that out. I mean, I think that there's a kind of balance in terms of exploitation and opportunity. Certainly, I think the relationship that I was in when I first mentored, there was an exploitive nature to it. I was really just so hungry for knowledge, but I had to also suss out where the strengths were and then the things that I did not want to mimic that I knew that eventually I was going to have to unlearn. That's a case-by-case basis. I mean, that's something that each apprentice has to figure out for themselves. And it's not just about skill. They could have the most skilled mentor possible, but they might just be so abusive or nasty. I mean, that's not healthy.
Well said. I do feel like being pedantic to a certain degree is usually a sign of care and experience. So I am kind of curious, is there an area of piano work where you just can't be that pedantic, or you just can't bring yourself to be that picky, or you don't like it that much?
No.
You love all of it?
I've got all the books. I've got Jorgensen's Bible of historical tuning. I need help.
What about, are there any pet peeves that you see in rebuilding work, which you see and you just think that does not work?
I really take the analogy of being a doctor and examining your patient, which is the piano. Let's say you're a pediatrician and the piano is actually a child, so it can't necessarily speak up for itself and tell you what its symptoms are. But the parent, who is the client, knows all about it and is saying, oh yeah, my poor child has a very bad cough, and what they need is one of those good cough drops that only you can prescribe. And I'm looking at the patient and I'm like, no, your child, I'm sorry to say, has lung cancer. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. But luckily, unlike in the real world, in this particular case, we have a cure for this. It's like going in with your professional mindset and just evaluating things the way they are. Now, everybody has a budget as well. So pet peeves would be not doing what the job called for. Mm-hmm. It could be shimming a soundboard that just is toast.
Yeah.
And 2 months later, all those shims are cracking out, and otherwise all the work is beautiful. Keeping an ancient key set. I mean, come on, we've got keyboard makers, and it's like, okay, I get it. It's a Kroneck Bach piano, and it's like, okay, we have to draw the line somewhere, and we're not going to necessarily put in a new key set. However, if this was grandma's piano, I'm going to draw the line. If it's a Wurlitzer, a really cheaply made piano, I'm going to say absolutely no way.
Yeah.
But there are times where these instruments might have a certain sentimentality, and even if you're going beyond the value of the piano, it can be justifiable to really do what's going to make this instrument the best. Mm-hmm. Here's some other pet peeves. Don't letter your plate with a Sharpie, please. Yeah, right.
Thank you, yeah.
Painting over A-graphs is another one. That's pretty common.
Yeah.
Anything that touches the string, have the duplex scales replated. I got tons of them. Keeping the old back action with the stiff tabs.
Oh, yeah. Are you more of a spoons person, or do you have a favorite back action design?
We've done a lot of the WNG. The spoons are nice because you can bend them side to side and up and down and quickly adjust. They're quite nice. I don't like the pivot to be in line with the underlevers. I think that professionals really call for those to be at different points. So I'm kind of a big fan of the Baldacin 3-in-1 Renner back actions.
Yeah.
Your employer talked me into going with a lot of traditional parts. We've used a lot of WNG stuff, and I think in schools there's definitely a place, but there's still a traditional weight that, I'm looking for the highest quality parts, but in a lot of our performance pianos, we're almost forced to still use traditional wooden actions.
Yeah.
But I love the innovation of WNG. They've just done such a great job. Mm-hmm. And Bruce Clark, he's been my main mentor out of anybody in terms of action design specifically. And I'm lucky to be 20 minutes down the road from Mason and Hamlin, so we've done a lot of sharing of beta testing for them, and they've helped me in so many different ways. So I've been lucky.
That's really special.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, today I had a Petroff that had these flanges that connected the damper wire to a bit of the flange that moved side to side. And I had never seen that before.
That's an older one then.
Yeah. I guess that's just so you don't have to bend the wire in order to change the alignment of the head on top of the strings, I guess.
Yeah, it's hinged by a piece of vellum probably. I had an old Cole that was like a 5th generation German piano that we did. Very interesting. And it had that in the back action, like this little V that kind of stuck into the...
Yeah.
I don't know. They didn't have wire bending pliers or something. They're like, hey, I've got an idea. Who knows, right?
You already mentioned having the different stations works a lot better for having multiple technicians, so you don't have to keep running across the workshop to be grabbing different things.
Right.
What about the layout of the shop, or in terms of the physical placement of the different areas or tool storage? Anything that sticks out in that regard?
I've had to evolve with this. It changes as, if you move your shop, for example. I've moved 2 or 3 times. Every space is going to have its challenges in terms of where are the walls and how do I fit this in. And starting off with a very open concept, if you could design the ideal shop, that would be great. Most of us don't have that ability.
Right.
But I think it's very important to have areas that specialize in certain aspects. Like I want my touch weight section where we're going to be letting the keys and have all the Stanwood touch weight scales out and everything kind of just set up, ready to go.
Yeah.
If you have the space where you don't have to be putting things away and resetting things up, we also build soundboards for the trade. So we have a whole area where the lumber's capped and cured. I'm going to be teaching a class this summer in Des Moines called Workspaces That Work. So I'll be specifically getting into this in a big way. I'm joining Toby Hamilton from Hamilton Piano. He's got an amazing shop. It's fun to tour different shops because every shop's going to have something that they're doing so well.
Yeah.
Like at Piano Craft, when you pull on the gates for the dust collector, it goes on. I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I've got to turn on the dust collector and open the gate, and then I've realized all the gates are open and it's not even working, so I got to shut. So I could spend literally a year just going around the shop and making it better. What'll often happen is you'll super glue 2 sticks together to make some kind of jig, and then 10 years later, you're still using that thing. And then every once in a while, you're like, you know what? I'll take this Saturday off, and instead of going out surfing, I'm going to rebuild that jig. I do love building jigs. I could build jigs all day long.
Who doesn't love building jigs? Yeah.
I think that's part of the thing that piano people, are infected with.
Yeah. Even the word, it's so musical in and of itself. Yeah.
For sure. Dance a jig.
What about tips for opening up a commercial space or shopping around for a commercial space, planning out that process? Do you have any top tips or absolute procedures that are a must?
Yeah. Move to the Midwest, I guess. I don't know. It's sheer luck. We were in a space in Boston, right in town, and we didn't have a lot of space, but it was this cool artist loft building that eventually gentrification happened. And once we started seeing architects and dentists move in, we're like, uh-oh. And the rent went from $3 net to 15 in a year. And we're like, okay.
Yeah.
So then we moved out to Hyde Park to this huge train building where they used to fix and build steam engines.
Yeah.
Same thing happened there. Then I moved up to Lowell, closer to where we bought our house. And that's an old wire and cable building, so old mill building with a freight elevator.
Oh, cool.
It's great space. I love it because it's not these super huge ceilings, which are just impossible to voice in. It's more like Mason and Hamlin, like 13 feet or something like that, like reasonable.
Yeah.
Wood floors. But my dream would be to buy space and really set it up right. And at the end of my career, my kids don't want to get into this, so it's like it'd be smart to have some real estate.
Yeah.
But it's just so prohibitively expensive. I don't know if that's going to be something that never happens, but we'll see.
I cut off your bio introduction at the beginning, but you've also done a lot of rebuilding work for universities and schools. So out of all the schools that you have done rebuilds for, do you have any habits, practices, or procedures that are a must for working with universities specifically?
There's going to be the resident tech that you're working with. So at the beginning, I always want to be very open to what they're looking for. Back to the doctor analogy, I'm at the stage of my career where I want to be trusted to just do my job and do the work, provide them with the best possible piano.
You're the oncologist.
Yeah. Now, there are stylistic differences, and sometimes that can be challenging and a lot of fun to work with. Like one of my friends who works at a school was a former manager of a Steinway dealership, and he's very much in this Steinway mold where he wants it to be as legitimate a Steinway restoration as can be, including like we've had to make custom stamps for the serial numbers, and he wants the acoustical jet dowels rather than the W&G perimeter bolts, which I feel are just the best thing since sliced bread and a way better and quicker system. Mm-hmm. But I do like the challenge of trying to satisfy reasonable requests. And, it's not like I've got so much work that, I'm looking to be like, well, it's my way or the highway.
Yeah. Yeah.
David Hughes is another one of my great friends and mentors. I mean, he really said, like, this is a David Hughes rebuild, and you're going to get nickel-plated hitch pins whether you like it or not. In some ways, that was brilliant because all of his rebuilds now are very consistent. They represent his brand. It's a lot easier to order parts because you don't have to get into all of the options.
Yeah.
I've tried to move more that way as I've become more established, but there's a part of me that still can't help myself and find ways to make it challenging and harder for myself.
Yeah.
Because you learn.
That's such an admirable trait, though. Yeah.
My accountant doesn't think so, but
Do you find yourself creating different pianos or different styles of rebuilds per the university or school? Or do you find yourself influenced or inspired or having to negotiate with the stylistic culture of the university?
I haven't had that. The only thing is some schools are just like, hey, can we skip out on the refinishing?
Yeah.
And I do make exceptions on that because I'm mostly invested in the musical instrument aspect of it. I would say that we've kind of come up with a recipe for specifically doing Steinways, like B's or D's are typically going to be the ones we're doing for universities almost exclusively. There's some exceptions. We did a Grotrian for ASU, but we've done B's and D's for them as well. And what we're finding is that if I do it my way now, that's what people are coming back for. So we've had some really great universities with very robust piano performance departments that have tried out some of our Steinways, and they're just hooked. They're like, yes, do that.
Awesome.
So my next thing, I'm going to try to take that and put my money where my mouth is. We're working on our first spec B, so we'll see, if I can actually sell it, because that's a risky, hard thing for a small rebuilder like myself to get into, because you're putting out a lot of money, and we don't have great retail space. So
what does spec B entail?
So spec piano is where you're basically rebuilding your own piano that you own to try to sell. So on spec.
Ooh, oh, that's exciting.
Well, maybe, or it's going to be the end of me. We'll see.
Well, regardless, I imagine you'll learn stuff in the process, which is always the goal.
Yeah. The difference is you can commission a rebuild and you don't really know how it's going to turn out. Whereas if one's already done, and oftentimes these performance departments, they don't have a lot of time. They can't wait a year for me to rebuild their current instrument.
Yeah.
They need to swap out. They need to get a new D or B in there over the summer. Fingers crossed that could be the new model, because originally I thought of myself as a small living room piano guy, and I love that. Working on, SMLs, O's, occasionally a B, maybe a C.
Yeah.
Didn't get too many concert grands. Now we're getting a lot of concert grands, and it's like, ugh. I like small pianos. It's like reaching of just sanding across the soundboard. Just a soundboard alone, it's like heavy.
Yeah, everything's extra, 100%.
And I realize it's probably a sign of success if I'm starting to get more of these type of instruments. Either that or because they cost $250,000 now.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, have you done any Spinet rebuilds recently, or is that in the category of absolutely not?
We did a Hardman. They made like these mini 60-note pianos. I don't think a rebuild of a Spinet. In terms of my own tuning, I'm very spoiled now. I go out there and I'll do backup concert tuning for one of my colleagues in town. So I get to like go on the stages and tune Steinway Ds that take 10 minutes, or if you really want to take the half an hour and do some chopstick voicing or whatever. I don't think I've touched a Spinet in 20 years.
I love that for you.
I've had pianos that, it's like your piano is the most amazing thing in the world. And I would carry that mindset to somebody that has a Spinet. And I have techs that work for me and I need to keep them busy and I want them to approach the Spinets. You're not going to put a new pin block and a soundboard in a Spinet. I'm not saying it can't be done. Obviously, it can be done. I would just really try to talk a customer out of that. I wouldn't take that job on, but if you were somebody that was looking at staying employed, I get it.
Yeah.
Somebody's like, hey, this belonged to my grandma and I want to rebuild a Spinet. It's like, yeah, 100%. As long as the client's going into it eyes wide open and they know they're spending 10 times what it will ever be worth.
Right.
We've done a lot of very, very significant rebuilding to uprights. Mm-hmm. Typically, they'd be Steinways. We did a Heinzman once, which had a sostenuto in it.
Wow.
That's a very high quality, full-size uprights. And for those, once W&G had their upright actions, so we've done that with an Iverson Pond, mostly Steinways, to get rid of the double flange where you try to space the hammer and you're also spacing the damper. I mean, that's just a disaster. But you put in a new W&G action and that thing just plays like it's brand new. It's a great system.
That's a great segue, actually, in terms of whether you have any strategies or habits for tempering expectations or negotiating larger jobs for individual clients.
Definitely a lot of success is going to be based upon managing expectations and communication. And that's why I try to get inside the head of my client as much as I can in terms of what those expectations are. And you can suss out whether it's reasonable or not in terms of this holy grail of tone that they're thinking, and explaining to them that you don't have full control over what a piano remanufacturing even is going to yield. You do the best you can, you work hard, you put your passion into it, you put your knowledge to it.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to be quite successful, but it's a piano. There's always going to be something that you can tear apart and pull at. Maybe there's not enough energy in this particular note or whatever it is. And then you bring in the magic of voicing to try to mask that. But yeah, it's very complicated.
Have you ever had any run-ins with liability insurance or having to negotiate with a client after something has gone wrong or after they're unhappy or anything like that? Or you've been sailing straight for a pleasantly long time?
There have been some unreasonable situations that were very difficult that I found at least a way of extricating myself out of.
Yeah.
And I suppose I could have been like dragged into that, and depending on how litigious they wanted to be, they maybe could have gone after me for whatever. You're dealing with the general public, and 99% of my clients have been absolutely amazing, and they become like family members.
Yeah.
But I've definitely had a handful of
difficult people, so to speak. Yeah.
That were just impossible, and you have to know when to like sever that as quickly as possible.
Do you turn down clients similarly to when you're interviewing technicians and you say you might not have what it takes? Do you interview clients and say, I think for the process that we would embark on, this isn't a good idea, and you might take a step back just based on personality or the prospects of working with them?
I do now. I didn't initially. One client I could think of, I referred to another technician that I thought would be a better fit. And then they ended up coming back to me and really kind of interviewed them, went down, checked out the situation. I'm like, all right, I think I can help you. And this person even said to me at the very beginning, I can tell you're trying to manage my expectations, but I really would like to work with you. And I'm like
Do you have any specific tips or thoughts on how technicians can protect themselves when they start getting into rebuilding jobs?
Have insurance, I guess.
Yeah.
I was listening to a radio program one day, and they were interviewing a heart surgeon, inventor who was working on some heart transplant gizmo.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, this is okay, but this is nothing compared to like what we're going to have 10 years from now. And he was just so unapologetic about like, dude, you're putting this in people now and it's not the bee's knees. And here I am, so full of anxiety about replacing the soundboard on my client's piano, and their life is not at stake.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking about that. Just like, don't overthink it. When I get into this work, I'm not thinking about what can go wrong. I'm thinking of how great this is going to be and how I'm going to have a new family member and friend for life and how they're going to be so appreciative that their beloved piano is now playing once again. I mean, we don't do a lot of trophy pianos, but more and more, unfortunately, I guess that's the clientele that can afford these things, and they're going to be out there. I mean, I love to get paid for the work.
Yeah.
But it's even better when I remember like one of the first times even tuning for an elderly lady that hadn't had their piano tuned in years, and it's in tune, and I started playing and they started crying.
Yeah.
Like, wow, you don't get this in construction work. I just rebuilt your whole bathroom. You got a new toilet. Come on, give me a couple of tears. You really have to try hard to really screw something up. Wherever your skills are at, do no harm, right? And just try to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's going to be plenty of time to hone your skills and to keep pushing it forward. In our shop, we're constantly, can we get a sharper chisel or bridge notching? It's like, will we ever be even better at notching? It's so hard and seems like a lifetime to master. And you hear about these people that used to be able to lick a piece of maple and know which way it was going to cut. I'm like, that doesn't happen to me.
But I feel like that enthusiasm for positivity and the deference for the clients and the job, that makes the work a lot better in the process. It sounds like it's a little bit of both, but I still love that attitude. That's great.
And there is a spiritual aspect to it. I have a spiritual side to me. I'm not religious per se, but definitely very spiritual. I mean, I think to be in this work where you're dealing with sound and
artistic sensibilities.
Yeah, and sympathy. I mean, the piano wouldn't work if there weren't sympathetic vibrations. So I've always felt that when I'm doing the work, if I can impart some kind of karmic thing, I mean, we all struggle with all the stuff that's going on in this world, but if I can like get into my work, knowing that it's my therapy and it's putting me in a happy place and I could somehow get that vibe in there, hey, why not? I'd rather have that in there than like, this sucks.
Dude, that's beautiful. That's a great answer. Gosh. Now, I had an idea. It could be fun. I thought we could try to do a game show style lightning round where I name a thing and you could give me your favorite design, tool, procedure, the first thing that pops into your head, which you strongly identify with that thing. What do you think?
We'll see where this goes, but go.
All right, ribs and the material you use for them.
So we're using Sitka spruce ribs, and where we want to lighten it up a little bit, we'll add in some sugar pine. So we've got some options there. I do also have laminated ribs that we can make up in a vacuum press. I haven't used those in a really long time, but all great options.
How about stringing?
So we're using Stephen Palello's wire. I've got all the different types stocked. So typically we'll go with the type 0, type 1 in the tenor, using his typogram and sometimes some XM up at the top. We're going to be rescaling all our pianos anyway, so kind of refining the speaking lengths. And like on an A1, for example, it has a transitional bridge that a lot of people hate. One of the things we do with that is we'll make up a new transitional bridge that's a bit wider, as it should be, and we plug it underneath with lead. So we kind of like really kind of mass load it and then rescale it. And we've had a pretty successful smoothing out that transition. So that's like low hanging fruit, but it's like a lot of fun.
Hammer hanging.
Custom board hammers, we do the whole, we get as raw as possible, and we're going to trim the tails, arc them, cove them, taper them, and then custom bore so it's matching the strings at an exact action stack elevation. Then we'll take them off and we'll measure them and we'll work on getting a very smooth strike weight curve. You have to start with an appropriate set of hammers anyway. You're not going to turn that set into something that it's not meant to be. So we kind of use what's called the least work curve. We're not using the David Stanwood zones. We measure it. We come up with a formula for figuring out what would be the least amount of material you have to add or subtract. So for my bellies, we're finding that I really, really like the special Blue Point Renner hammer. seems to sound very, very nice on our soundboards. But I've used a lot of other hammers that have worked well. Some of the Ronson Weichertfeld hammers, particularly on Mason and Hamlin's, we might go that route.
Yeah.
And of course, we've used a lot of Steinway hammers because sometimes it's a high-profile piano and they need it to be all Steinways. And that's a totally different process, and I'm used to it. You can get a great sound out of it.
How about glue?
Oh, you want to get into polyvinyl acetates, epoxies. We've got so many different glues in the shop. I mean, I love hide glue for key bushings, and I used to hang my hammers that way. Now I've moved more towards the molding glue. What's nice about is in hanging hammers is it's just enough time to really get the angles and the tilt correct, and then it sets up. Hide glue is a lot of fun, and I even get it from that special glue guy and buy it like in the grade 192 or 251, depending on the use. But most of the glues that we're using these days are more modern glues. We'll use the SK8 or the skate glue made by Franklin, or the Tight Bond 50 for gluing in soundboards, gluing on ribs, for laminated structures, like gluing our bridges together. It might be the skate glue, or we'll use epoxy for gluing our pin blocks to the stretchers, and then they'll get doweled. We also glaze the front edge of the pin block so it mates with the plate there. So lots of glues.
Lots of glues.
Oh, and sometimes even like good old Elmer's glue is actually a decent glue for gluing on damper felt, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
You want to think about the next rebuilder for sure. So CA glue doused in the pin block. I've had a few plates where I thought I was not going to be able to get them to come out. And eventually they come out, but that could be in my pet peeve category.
CA glue in the pin blocks, yeah.
Well, it's the way that it's applied.
I see. Okay.
You can be precise with it and have it, thin amount going down the tuning pin. We all have been there where, it's a few pins and you need to do what you need to do. But I'm not into like dousing the whole entire pin block.
Sneezing on it.
Yeah, there's no need for that. I mean, of course there is. The need is you've got a client that is never going to be able to afford a new pin block, and you're just trying to do so. I mean, again, these things come out of oftentimes a good place, and I get that. But eventually that piano is going to come into the shop, and that rebuilder is going to be
miserable,
cursing me if I've done that. Yeah.
Yeah. What about plates?
Don't break them. We have had one hoist mishap on a concert grand, and I'm looking for a replacement plate.
Oh.
I was able to buy a whole other D to get a plate to move into this piano for a client. That worked out. Now I'm left with a Steinway D with no plate, or I've got a broken plate.
Oh my God.
I posted it on Facebook, and so if anybody out there ever knows of a Steinway D plate that's available, it can't be in a Steinway that is otherwise rebuildable. Otherwise, I'm in this Greek tragedy of buying a Steinway D, taking the plate out of it, putting it into this other piano, then looking at that Steinway D and being like, I could rebuild that if I find another plate, add a Turnham, locked in that.
Right. So
don't break them. We've had other plates that came in broken, and there's a guy named Bob Beck that used to do all the plate inspections for Steinway, and he came up to our chapter once and gave a meeting, and he became a friend, and he's my go-to guy. He's getting up there, but he still takes my phone calls, so sometimes I'll send him pictures, and I'll be like, should I run from this, or is this something that can actually be, he's like, slow arc welding, and find a guy that works on old farm equipment.
Wow.
Make sure they don't turn it to white metal, and we take a lot of time in terms of the refinishing of plates. I mean, they're just potentially so beautiful. Like our lettering, we use the inkwell caps with the signer's paint, and just take 8 hours to letter some of those fancy plates, because you look at the old font and what they did and the time they took, and it's just so beautiful. So we'll prime the plates and multiple layers of sanding them and getting the gold just right. And you can tell the good shops that are doing really good plate work versus ones that are just spray bombing them out in the backyard.
Yeah. Okay, pin blocks.
So we make our own pin blocks. I inherited Chris Robinson's setup. The only thing is that he designed it to a tapered block. I don't know what he was thinking. God bless him, because it's so much easier to cut pieces in a rectangle cross-banded pieces. But we did lose this press. We had a fire, not in our space, but some of the water came down and wrecked a bunch of our equipment and some of our lumber. We've recovered from it, but I'm looking at designing a new press. But because I can get really excellent maple from up in Vermont last time I went up there, I found a place and they had some beautiful stuff, and then I came back a year later and they had moved it all up into the rafters, and I was looking through there. I only found a couple pieces. I'm like, this is going to be a pain in the neck to cherry pick this quarter-sawn maple that I need. And the shop manager came over and he's like, well, what are you looking for? So I explained, I'm looking for the really beautiful tight grain quarter-sawn maple. And he's like, well, come on over to this building. And he had this huge stack, which they prepped for the wooden aircraft industry or something. this gorgeous tiger stripe maple. And I'm like, yeah, how do I get a couple pieces of that? And he's like, well, you got to buy the whole unit. It's 1,000 board feet. And I'm like, okay. And I had brought up a U-Haul, so I'm loading it in, and I'm looking at the sign, like the weight limit of 3,000 pounds, and I could see the whole thing just sinking. And I had to drive through like the Green Mountain Pass with this thing.
Yeah.
Anybody that knows Vermont, these aren't like paved roads. I was white-knuckling it the whole way home that I was going to completely drop the axle on this thing.
Gosh.
So out of that, it's kind of good that I do pin blocks, because typically you'll have different grades from your bridge cap as you will the pin blocks. And that's what I learned from Christian Bolduc. It's like they get a boatload of maple, but the great thing about making both products is you can use the wood for the two products and then still have some for the fireplace.
Wow. All right. I could definitely keep picking your brain forever, and our listeners would learn boatloads more. But of course, all good things must come to an end. And so to wrap up this fabulous interview, can you tell us your favorite thing about piano technology and your favorite tool?
The people. I love my fellow technicians. I love the customers. I love the legacy that the piano makers have left us. Even learning about, like, I love reading the biographies about the Steinways. It's like Succession, you know?
It is, yeah.
And the music. I mean, it all comes down to like how healing and beautiful the music is. And we're very lucky. I've had hedge fund managers that were like, oh, I'm so jealous. I love your job. It's so cool. And I'm like, I wouldn't mind making like $1 billion a year like you, but thank you. Yeah, that's a great compliment.
Yeah, spiritual fulfillment versus financial fulfillment. So then that just leaves your favorite tool.
It has to be my own spring-loaded, well, now pneumatic go bar for pressuring. Every time I use that, I'm just like, oh, this is just so amazing.
Well, Jude, you have been a guest for the history books. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point.
Don't even tempt me, really. Well, then we'll see you in part 2. Another huge thank you to Gazelle for sponsoring this episode, and another huge thank you to Jude for joining us. If you'd like to reach out to him about workshop consultations, see photos of his work, or if you have questions about the many, many topics we covered in today's interview, you can reach out to him through absolute-piano.com. Otherwise, we look forward to having you at the next episode, and stay groovy, listeners.